There we go.
All right.
So
Welcome,
yours,
everyone.
Adrian.
Thanks very much. Welcome, everyone. I'm Adrian Maury, as Sue mentioned. I'm working for the Canada Border Services Agency in the Information Science and Technology branch. And we had a recent exercise where we have developed a new electronic message for the exchange of accounting information from external clients to CBSA. It's called the Commercial Accounting Declaration. It's in the progress of being built. And over the past year, especially most of 2020, we designed and created a new implementation guide for producing an XML set of messages, inbound and outbound. So this commercial accounting declaration is to be used for clients who are importers who imported goods to account for their goods after release has taken place. Now in Canada, just to clarify, we're a little different from some other countries in that we have a separate process between release of goods and accounting of goods. So I'm going to take a little step backwards in here, just clarify that, because for those of us who work in CBSA and have for a long time, we take it for granted that when goods reach the border in Canada, while we get pre-arrival information that allows an officer to make a decision on release of the goods. So in other words, the officers are able to determine risk assessment, health, safety, and security decisions that are made on the goods. And we also have invoice information pre-arrival, but we don't always have final accounting detailed information. That information, that final accounting detailed information, is not required to release the goods into the economy of Canada. However, that information is certainly required before the payment can be calculated and due for the goods. So what happens in Canada most of the time is that we get advanced release information from importers or their brokers prior to the goods arriving, and then pre-arrival risk assessment and release decisions are made on that pre-arrival release information. Goods are released into the economy of Canada, and then there is a time limit whereby the importer must transmit final accounting data before the billing period ends. So the final accounting data is being replaced. Currently, we're working with a system that's over 40 years old. Our current accounting document is called a B3, and so we refer to that a lot because that's what we'll be replacing. But this B3 is being replaced within it, not just a commercial accounting declaration, but really an entire accounting process. I'm not going to go into all the details, that's for another call, of all of the aspects of CBSA's accounting and revenue management project. It's a major initiative affecting almost all areas where accounting or monetary processes are involved. But for the purposes of this call, we're focusing solely on this accounting declaration, and it's called the CAD, the CAD, the Commercial Accounting Declaration. And when this was designed, the objective was to follow the WCO, the World Customs Organization Data Model. And the rationale for this, of course, is that Canada is a signatory to the revised Kyoto Convention, which, amongst many other aspects of the convention, relates to transmission of information data. It relates to how goods are examined and what types of decisions can be made and what types of processes that all of the signatories, the world, the global customs community have signed on to. So focusing on solely data, there is an annex to the revised Kyoto Convention that states that where possible, countries will use the WCO data model, its data elements, its structures, and its electronic message formats to exchange messages with with other clients and with other countries. And so for the CARM CAD, we opted to, do our best to follow the WCO data model. And so that's what we're going to look at today. And so what we did over the last year is that we produced a message implementation guide. And I'm going to pull up, let's share my screen here. Yeah. So I just want to confirm if people can see my spreadsheet. Is that?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So I'm going to show the customs, the commercial accounting declaration from CBSA in spreadsheet format right now. And so what you can see, I'm just going to scroll a little bit here to see that you can see each data element that we have that we require for our the accounting declaration and our CBSA business definition requirements. So in other words, this is our designed, actually established by our policy area. So these definitions are the ones that are required to follow the Customs Act. So where Customs requires information for the project or to meet the acts and regulations, our policy area would come up with the definitions that we need, to meet our legislative requirements. But to work with the WCO data model, for every element that we have, every data element and every business need that we need to meet by acquiring the data, we have then a requirement to match each of those to the WCO data model, because the data model itself is a very large collection of reusable attributes. That each data element looks something like this, is called an attribute. And these attributes are grouped into what are called classes, which you'll see on in this document on these blue lines. And it means they're grouped together. So logical series of elements that are similar to each other or have a similar function would be grouped together in these classes, in these groups. And so when we're building an electronic message, there are a number of factors that we would need to align between our business requirements for CBSA and the globally established data model, which is based on acceptable business requirements for the global community. So I'm going to stop for a moment right here. I want to see if there's any questions, if everybody's following me so far. Is this okay?
Sounds good.
Excellent. All right. So when we created the commercial accounting declaration, then we have a series of data elements that we're going to turn into an electronic message. And so the electronic message format that CBSA is using is the WCO data model's already established format called XML. And XML is simply one of a number of electronic formats that can be used to create electronic messages. The WCO currently supports 2 different electronic message formats. One of them is an EDIFACT message called the GovCBR. And now CBSA, just as a side note, has worked with the GovCBR now for about 7 years. We have about half a dozen of our messages that were mapped to the GovCBR, most recently the integrated import document, which I'll just take a step back for a moment and mention. I mentioned earlier about we have a separate release process for the release of the goods, and the integrated import document is our main tool now, which clients can send us for release information. It's based on the GovCBR, and we use that document to share and retrieve information from other government departments. So when we receive the IID, then it is automatically shared with relevant Canadian government departments who maybe have an impact or have a say on whether or not the goods are affected by that government department. And then we communicate between those government departments. They can make decisions, and those decisions can go back to the officer and the importer. So we work with these electronic formats, and this one that we're using for this message is called an XML. So what we've done here then, and the reason for the call today, is now that we have completed our documentation. Last year, we actually, it was sent out, I think it was finalized in January of this year, 2021. We've created our message implementation guide. And now what we want to do is we're looking at how will this electronic message conform to the WCO data model. And more specifically, what we want to make sure is that if a user uses the documentation that we've provided, will the message, the electronic message that they come up with, conform enough to the WCO data model, for example, to be able to be exchanged with a user or another country who is also working with the same WCO data model. And to do that, we need to check certain aspects of the message itself. So this is on the screen. Hopefully you can see the WCO conformity criteria that were suggested and established by the WCO Secretariat, and in conjunction with conversations that we've had with the WCO. I will say right now that Canada is a bit of a guinea pig on this exercise, because we are literally the first country in the position to develop a new message and then subject it to this new process. So one of the reasons for this call is to not only share with you, but to share with other WCO members our experience with doing this, because we really don't have any other template or previous country to look at who's gone through this particular exercise in the way we have. So we're winging it. So I'm just going to start then and let you know which were the categories that we used to check and make sure that our message instance, our XML message, if you publish it, is it going to conform with the WCO data model? So mostly what I'm going to look at first are the actual data elements themselves. And so this is where the spreadsheet comes in that you can see on your screen. And I'm just going to quickly walk through what the categories were of establishing the conformity. So the first one we're looking at here is in this column K, called order. And when we're working with that, for the order column, what we did is we took a look at the published WCO data model. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. When the WCO data model is published externally, it's published in a series of Excel spreadsheets. There are other documentation available, but these Excel spreadsheets have the bulk of the actual data of the WCO data model. So it looks like what you see on your screen, which is kind of similar to the last screen we were looking at. But this spreadsheet, for example, has the entire WCO data model. It's almost 9,000 lines long. I think it's 8,500 lines. It's very, very big, because I call it the kitchen sink. It has every business element related to the cross-border that are used by cross-border regulatory agencies. So this can cover every aspect of the customs importation or exportation process, or transit, where you're transiting goods through a country. This covers everything from cargo information to the conveyance information to banking and so on. So it's very, very large, and there are many, many elements. And when we, CBSA, worked, for example, with the Customs Accounting Declaration, Commercial Accounting Declaration, we would only have a subset, right? Because we don't need to use the whole thing. We simply need to use a subset. So we would work with the WCO data model, and then when we need to map, our first step was to map every one of our elements to a corresponding element in the WCO data model. So I'm just going to pick one here. I'm going to take message function coded as an example. So in CBSA, we would need to use message function code to identify whether or not what the message type is going to be. And when I say type, I mean, is this an original? Is it a change? Is it an amendment? Is it a cancellation, or so on? So that's really what our message function coded looks like. And the definition, it just says indicating the function of a document, but from our perspective, it's our transmission function. It basically is, this is what we need. And so we would, because we have this business element, we look for the same element in the WCO data model. And in a case like this, it even has the same name. So this is where we call them mapped together. So that's why you see them both side by side. And then what we would do is for, say, an element like this, the first thing we're going to do is check and make sure that the order of this attribute, message function coded, is in the same order, like this type of order as you see on your screen. For example, this is the declaration class. And of the elements we're using, we have document acceptance date and then message function coded, functional reference number. That's the order that they're listed, these attributes, for example. And we can see that message function coded does come after document acceptance date and before functional reference numbers. So when we're talking about order, we're literally talking about the order of the class or the attribute. And we simply marked it if it was, if our business usage of this message was out of order with the WCO data model, we made a note. And this order could apply to the whole class. So for example, I'm going to look at the, I think the, not duty tax fee, but yeah, I think it's a duty tax fee. No, the good shipment class, for example. So this is a major class, and in the CAD, the CBSA CAD, we found that for the purposes of our systems design, we ended up putting this very large class at the end of the sibling classes. So you can see that we have good shipment after unloading location. It's just not, it's after. But if we were to look at this spreadsheet here, and I'm not going to go down because it's about 4,000 lines, but you'll see that good shipment is just above importer, for example, in the regular WCO data model. So we mark this one as out of order. So that's what that column is. We simply are marking where we are in order, and then we can make a note on how, we can discuss later how much this might not conform with the data model. We've had discussions in Brussels about this because we think that sibling classes, in other words, where the class is all at the same level, and right now it's easier for me to display this if I show you another software. This software is called gefeg.fx. And it shows you the same information, but the classes that are in dark blue in the spreadsheet, they show up as these red C's, so you can expand them. So I just wanted to show you good shipment is here, you see, and importer is a little below it. But in our message, good shipment, instead of being there, it comes after unloading location, okay? So there's unloading location, and there's our good shipment. So that's it for being out of order. So what the impacts are, we can discuss later, but I just wanted to let you know that was our first criterion. So we have an X. So for example, where something's out of order, we made a note, and then we say in our results where it would normally appear in the data model. Any questions on order? Does that make sense? Okay, I will carry on. So the next aspect, the next conformity criteria that we looked at are structure. And so in this case, it's not even so much order, but let's say I'm going to look at this one, I think. Is it this one? think exit date. No, not exit date. Isla, can you help me? I was thinking of the ones where, oh, I know. Well, we have where we're using an element where it is not in the, it is in the data model, but it's not listed at all in that class. We've marked it as a structure issue. So I'm just going to filter this for a moment. And let's just go, just want to pull up. There we go. So for example, exit date. Let me just remove my filter. Hang on a second here. I wasn't sure which one it was. We have more than one. There we go. Data direct ship. Okay, so in this case, here we have an attribute that exists in the WCO data model. Exit date exists, but exit date does not exist right in the class called commodity. However, for CBSA purposes, CBSA had a requirement to include exit date. In this case, it is the definition actually lines up with our date of direct shipment. We have, sorry, I don't have the WCO definition here, but actually I can pull it up. It is under good shipment. And what we found is that it's the correct definition for us, because you can see it's the when the goods depart from the last port or airport or customs territory. So this is the last date. And in CBSA, it's the date the goods begin their uninterrupted journey to Canada. So it's the same business definition, but in Canada, we need to have this listed under as a subset of the actual commodity class, but it doesn't exist in the data model at that level. So because it doesn't, we've created what's called an extension. And extensions are permitted where, let's say, just it's Canada only use. So we're taking an established data element and we are identifying where, because we have a unique business purpose that really isn't required outside of Canada, we've created what's called an extension, and it's like a proprietary mapping and usage of this WCO data element, but at a location where it currently doesn't exist in the WCO data model. Any questions on that? So, no? Okay. So for our structure, and again, if we just look at how many we had, really there's only, this time really there's only 4 that we've identified here. I think there might be a couple others. We have to do another review just to make sure that we've caught them all, where we've had to use a WCO data element, but not in the class where it's recorded. So that's our findings on the structure conformity criteria. Any questions? If not, I will carry on. The next one is, I think the base information package, the BIP stands for base information package. And I believe we only needed to check here to make sure that we have elements that are in fact in the entire base. So in other words, when we're working with this declaration class, which is really one of probably the largest class in the WCO data model, because it's everything. It has everything inbound. So we call it B2G, or business to government. The entire subset of elements that would ever be transmitted for any circumstances from business to government are located in the declaration class. The declaration class is what we worked with for the inbound information from the importers or brokers to submit the CAD, and the response is transmitted from G to B, government to business, in our case CBSA, back to the client. The responses are also part of a base information package, and they start with our response base information package, which really is simply sort of an envelope around the declaration. So you have our declaration class. Actually, I think I can show you a little bit easier what it might look like in a case using the software. I just want to quickly show you that the response contains the declaration in the WCO data model. So when we open it up, you can see response, that's the main class. And then there are subclasses, and one of the subclasses of the response is the entire declaration, the whole declaration, the entire thing. So when we looked at, for example, the spreadsheet I'm showing you today, you notice we have two tabs, one for inbound and one for outbound. For the purposes of our discussion today, I'm only working with the outbound because every response of the CAD at CBSA will contain the entire inbound message. We reproduce it and send it back to the client, and we add elements to it. So we add our response header information, and both the declaration and response have metadata. Communication metadata, if you think about it, is like an envelope. If you're mailing an address, you have an envelope and it has address information on it, and an electronic message is very similar. You need the envelope package. You have your header and trailer, which is like the front and back of the envelope, and then you have who it's addressed to. So that's our metadata that we look at. And then when it's a response, we put all our entire declaration inside the response, and then we add our calculations to it. So this is our response class and our declaration class. And that's what it would look like here, a response class, and then in a subset is the declaration. So for the purposes of our checking the subset of the base information package, we just want to make sure that we hadn't got any classes that wouldn't fit within the base. And the two bases that we looked at really are declaration and response, and they're all there. So we really I don't think we have any X's in this column. No, we don't, because everything fit. Any questions on that? Okay. Can I just confirm this, that you can still hear me? I want to make sure I'm not.
Yep, you're good.
Awesome.
Yep.
Excellent. Thanks so much. Okay. So for the next criteria that we looked at were the element names. And so now what we're doing is we're checking our business definition of our CBSA element, and then making sure that we're using the same proper business definition in the WCO data model. So this is a case where, did we get the mapping right? Did we, for example, we have a recipient business number. Does that match the element we mapped it to, in this case, for example, recipient identification? So our team wanted to examine each one of these and make sure that the mapping we selected from a business perspective, because keep in mind what we're trying to do here is make sure that our business aligns, because lining up the business with the data collection means that your definitions are the same on a more global scale. You're comparing like objects to each other, and to make sure we're doing that, each attribute needs to be mapped from a business level definition. And so sometimes it can get tricky, sometimes it's very simple. For example, if you look at our element called accepted date, the WCO data model has document acceptance date. So, we're fairly certain, especially because ours is at a header level, this is at the overall declaration level. We know that this is the same business definition, but our team had to look at all of them. And so what we did is we made sure, are there any in here that we think did not meet a business definition, but we had to go ahead anyway, but we're identifying ones that are questionable. So I'm just going to take a quick look at what we found under our business definitions. And in this case, We have, actually, I'm not worried about the metadata because that's just our commercial accounting definition, but we made a note that our XML document starts with our document metadata, and we're double checking from a syntax perspective to make sure that if each of our messages and each of our path lines start with the word document metadata level, that this is okay. We're in the process of checking that. And really the only other business definition that was questionable when we did our comparison from really, do we get like to like? And the one that didn't fit was declarant, because in CBSA, when the group that was doing the mapping did the mapping, they selected, they used customs broker, but they mapped it to WCO class declarant instead of agent or broker. But agent is the WCO Data Model definition for declarant. So for example, if I pull it up here, if you look at the definition for agent, it is the party who's authorized to act on behalf of another party, okay? But the declarant is the party who makes a declaration or on whose behalf a declaration is made. In other words, the declarant really is the importer, right? Because you might make a declaration, but it's the party on whose behalf the declaration is being made, on whose behalf, not the party who is acting on behalf of another party. I realize the semantic difference, it sounds like almost the same thing, but it's completely different. One is the person acting on behalf of the other guy. The other one is the other guy. So this is the only one that was questionable. So we had to identify this as an element conformity issue under our element name. But other than that, the rest of the business definitions, when we did our review, they all lined up very nicely. So we didn't have any other issues. Any questions on the element names? Okay. So our next one, which is fun, this is it's what we did with format. So what are we looking at with format? Format means how long or how many characters are permitted from a data modeling perspective. So now we're getting into more specifics. The format column looks like this in CBSA, and it looks like this in the WCO data model. And you can see, if you're not familiar with electronic messages, although I think most of you are, format tells you what type of characters can be transmitted in that field. So AN, for example, stands for alphanumeric, which usually means you can type in letters or numbers. And then how many, the 2 dot means you can do up to, say, 70 characters. And in this case, this is, what you're limited to. So for example, if we look at message function coded, I'm going to pick this one because this one is a case where, well, actually, no, let's look at functional reference number first. It's AN.70. That is the limit. You can have up to 70 characters, and CBSA is AN.35. So as long as CBSA stayed under the WCO maximum, we're okay. However, if CBSA exceeded either the maximum number of characters, and I'm going to go to message function code here, or if CBSA had a different representation, so you can see here CBSA selected AN.2, but message function coded in the WCO data model is N.2. No alpha characters are permitted in the WCO data model. Now, in this case, CBSA isn't going to use a letter anyway, but this is a syntax conformity non-compliance. They should have been the same. CBSA should have, in this case, used n ... particularly since CBSA only used numeric characters. So this is flagged as an exception. And you can see we have an X here. And what we did is simply identified it doesn't comply. So really, by rights, we should be changing our message implementation guide to match the WCO data model, particularly since we are only using numeric characters. I'll just make a little side note here that there is a big discussion has come up more than once at the WCO Data Model Projects team, the DMPT, when it comes to what's called numeric, because N can stand for two different things. N means the characters that you're presenting. Let's say it's a coded value, and a code 4 means change, or code 9 means add. It's a code that's fixed. Although it's numeric, you can't add or subtract it. Then there's the discussion about, well, what if it's numeric where you're talking like currency or date, for example, but currency especially, now you're talking about a number that can be added and subtracted, and you can have decimal places and so on. And in a case like that, most computer systems drop leading zeros. But when it's a text field, that's all numbers. Let's say you have 0002. You need to have your system print 0002. We all know in Excel, you have to put a little hyphen in front of the zeros to make it into a text field so that you can see the leading zeros. So that's a subtlety that we had to look at as well. But just letting you know that from a format perspective, we had to identify the ones where simply the format was expressed differently. So I've just shown you a few of them here where we have the mode of transport where we exceeded. I think that one was N1 in the WCO data model. Our city names, all of them, were matching SAP software, I think, and that was using, that actually extends to 40, but the WCO data model only permits, I think it's 35. There it is here. So we exceeded it, so we've had to list it as a difference. And then there are a few other ones here where this is 25 maximum for the product identity, the model ID, the identity number, and ours is 40, and so on. And we had reasons, like, so we have justification for why these are different. Some of them, like mode, we had a very healthy discussion about mode. This one had been identified earlier, and there were aspects of CBSA's existing systems that simply couldn't be changed to meet, like they've been established before the alignment to the WCO data model. So that becomes one of the reasons why we don't align. But we have in this document at least identified the areas where we didn't conform. So that's the summary of our results. And so that is under format. Any questions about the format findings? Okay. I'm going to go through just quickly two more. For the code lists, this is one where we have elements where if you look at the descriptions in the WCO data model, and I'm just going to, we haven't done this one yet, and I'll tell you why. Where you have a code, let's say message function coded, here's one where you see that there is in the WCO data model, they give you the code list reference. So it can look something like this, where you see the words user code. If user codes are permitted, and as long as we're within the correct format, my team could ignore the code field because it means our CBSA user codes are going to be fine because user codes are permitted. Anything that says user code, we're good to go. But where it says EDIFACT codes or UN-LOC code, or some of the other codes where it'll give you generally EDIFACT codes, I mean, they'll give you a field reference, then we would be required to go to the internet or go to a software that contains the EDIFACT code list, and then ensure that the codes that we use, that we've told our clients to use, are located on the EDIFACT code list quoted here. And this is very time consuming because these codes aren't published. This exercise, in fact, has led us to make a suggestion for the next major version of the WCO data model to please maybe have a separate sheet where the codes for each attribute are published so that when we're trying to do a conformity exercise, we don't have to leave this document and go research elsewhere. But what I can show you is that this is where this particular software, Geth.fx, is certainly handy. So I'm just going to show you message function coding and why we would prefer using this. You can see that it still says EDIFACT codes 1225, but the good thing about our software is that when we go to code content, we can look at the accepted codes, and you can see right here in the software that the codes that we might want to use, which I know, for example, are 4 and 9, we're okay. We can check right away. They're listed here. So this column hasn't been completed yet because here in CBSA, we're having a little bit of an issue with our access to the software. You know, that's another, not related to this discussion, but I just wanted to point out that if you are working with a tool like this one, doing this conformity exercise is certainly speeded up if you can use the software and simply check the coded value right under your attribute. It's right there, rather than exiting and going to another screen, opening up the internet, pulling up the EDIFACT codes and looking at EDIFACT code list, for example, 1225, which is what you'd have to do to finish this exercise. So for our purposes, this part is not done yet because we were working on the other columns as you see them, and we hadn't completed yet. So lastly, with respect to the core data type, there was a little bit of a question on what we were supposed to check on this. My initial understanding, and by the way, this is a really good exercise for Canada and for the WCO to go, all right, what do we really mean by checking this core data type? My understanding initially was that, did we get the correct core data type? And I want to show you just some core data type attributes so you can understand what I'm talking about. If we have a coded value, then our core data type attributes are going to look like what you see on the screen: code content, identifier, the language, the scheme, and so on. So these are all attributes related to the code, or consider it metadata related to this attribute. And you can see each of these is identified. I'm using the software to show them to you because they're currently not published in the WCO Data Model, as you see here. But let's say we're talking about a date. Well, now the core data type element, the sub-elements, you can see are different. Now we're talking about a date type, or let's say we're talking about a number. Now you're talking about identifier. So when we're talking about these core data types, my initial understanding is, did we get the right correct core data type? For example, if we mapped a functional reference number, did we map it to a coded value? For example, that would be incorrect. You know, we might have a similar business definition, but if ours was a coded value and this is an identifier, well, then the core data types don't match. However, my understanding recently from the Secretariat was that our core data type comparison was, I'm just going to check quickly. No, so it's not there. The core data type comparison related to how our XML message would be structured. So in that case, with our XML message, and I think I have one here, I'm just going to pull up an outbound message to show you what the outbound output looks like. So here's a sample response from the CAD, and you can see the same, see the declaration, we have our acceptance date, and we have a string and so on. And I'm just going to show you one aspect. Here is an example of where we have the core data type sub-attribute. In this case, it's currency. So we have a dollar amount, and then this amount in quotation marks shows the currency value. Or another one where we have, here is a measurement. So here we're showing the core data type attribute, in this case, the qualifier kilograms, on the same line. And as far as I know, you know, these distinctions are acceptable and matching to the WCO data model, but we still have some outstanding questions on these. So this is the criteria that we were checking. This is all of them. I know I'm running a bit late, but just one more thing I wanted to show you is that we did have, there was a mapping distinction. So we have a definition for all of our addresses where we're using line, which really shows the delivery points such as street number, post office box, all of it just in a string. And then lately we created specific sub-elements in address called street number, street name, post office box ID. But you can see there's a note here in the WCO data model to say not to be used in conjunction with this one, with line, street number, and PO box. And we did on the CAD. So we haven't quite figured out how to identify that one yet. But that is the last of our criteria. So quickly, next steps, I know some of you have to leave, is that we will be summarizing these findings. Again, we're still in the process of figuring out how to communicate, our findings and what's the extent of our findings. But we think that I would certainly say overall, given how many elements there are and the small number of conformity issues we have, I would say this definitely largely conforms to the WCO data model, and we'll be summarizing these at a later date. So I need to wrap up, but I do want to ask, are there any questions? I know I went fairly quickly here, but I just want to check with people to see if there's anything else.
No questions. Very well done, Adrienne. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here.